After a landslide destroys her village, Hannah guides a group of orphaned children to plant apricot trees over the graves of the lost. Through grief, storms, and rebirth, they learn that love and memory endure like the blossoms that always return.
The morning air hung heavy with a silence that spoke louder than any voice. I stood at the edge of the landslide's scared earth, the ground beneath my feet trembling faintly with memories I could not shake. The village I once knew had been torn apart in a single, devastating moment. The earth had swallowed homes, lives, and a future I had envisioned with my husband. Now, only the jagged remains of broken walls and twisted trees remained, a graveyard of memories beneath a sky that seemed too vast and indifferent. I am Hannah, but today I am more a guardian of sorrow, a bearer of fragile hope. My delicate frame seemed at odds with the weight I carried, yet within me, a quiet strength stirred. The landslide had taken my husband, my parents, and so many others, but it had not taken the breath of life that still whispered through the restless wind. As dawn painted the sky with soft hues of pink and gold, I traced the outlines of fallen homes with my eyes, imagining the laughter and warmth that once lived there. The distant melody of birdsong rose, like a fragile thread weaving through the heavy silence, a reminder that life persisted even after loss. From the corner of the village, the hesitant footsteps of children approached, 4 of them, their small figures silhouetted against the rising sun. Taro, with his slender frame and dark, searching eyes. Kiko, her sharp gaze and defiant stance belying the storm within. Sora, the youngest, whose curiosity flickered behind tear-streaked cheeks, and another child, silent but present, a shadow of grief in their own right. They were the orphans, the ones left behind by the landslide's cruel hand, and now they were mine to guide. I greeted them with a soft smile, my voice barely more than a whisper. Today, we begin a new journey, together. Their eyes flickered with uncertainty and something fragile, hope, perhaps, or the longing for it. We gathered beneath the lone cherry tree that had somehow withstood the disaster, its branches bare yet reaching toward the sky as if in silent prayer. I brought with me saplings of apricot trees, delicate, resilient, and bursting with the promise of renewal. I explained how these trees would grow over the graves of our lost loved ones, their blossoms a living memory of those we held dear. Taro lowered his gaze, clutching a small notebook where he had been sketching apricot blossoms since the day I taught him about their significance. Kiko's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a stubborn line, but she did not turn away. Sora's small hands trembled as he reached for a sapling, his innocence unbroken despite the shadow of grief. Together, we knelt in the soft earth, the scent of spring rain mingling with the rich aroma of the soil. The children's hands, dirtied and trembling, dug small holes beside freshly marked graves, each one a sacred promise to remember and to heal. I watched closely, occasionally brushing a stray lock of hair from my face, my fingers lingering on the rough bark of a young apricot sapling as I whispered to it, "Grow strong, and carry our memories with you." The earth, once torn and broken, welcomed the saplings as if recognizing the need for life to rise again. A gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead, carrying the faint scent of apricot blossoms yet to come. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of memory and the fragile pulse of new beginnings intertwine beneath the vast, watchful sky. In that moment, beneath the quiet resilience of the village and the tender care of new life, I dared to believe that healing could begin, that even in loss, there was the possibility of rebirth, and that the song of the falling apricots would one day fill the air with a melody of hope. But the path ahead was uncertain, and the shadows of grief lingered still. How would these children, and I, find the strength to nurture not only the trees but also our wounded hearts? The answer lay hidden in the seasons yet to come, in the silent growth beneath the earth, and in the quiet courage that stirs when we dare to hope. The morning air was cool and still as I gathered the children beneath the pale light of the waking sky. The orchard spread before us like a tender promise, the earth freshly turned, waiting to embrace the fragile apricot saplings we were about to plant. I knelt by a small hole, the soil soft and dark beneath my fingertips, and invited the children closer. "See how the roots spread gently," I said, lifting a young sapling with care. "We must place it softly into the earth so it can grow strong." Their eyes were wide, some curious, others hesitant. I could feel their grief like an invisible weight pressing down, yet here, in this quiet act, there was a chance to sow something new. Taro lingered on the edge, his slender figure hunched slightly, clutching a worn sketchbook. He didn't join the others at the hole but watched from afar, his dark eyes tracing the distant hills. I knew his silence well, a refuge from the pain that clung to him like a shadow. "Would you like to try planting one?" I asked gently, but he only shook his head, the corners of his mouth tight. Still, I saw him glance at the apricot blossoms fluttering in the breeze, a silent conversation between boy and tree. Kiko, on the other hand, stood with arms crossed and eyes sharp, as the thorny branches of the bushes nearby. Her defiance was fierce, a shield against the ache of loss. "Why plant trees for those who are gone?" she asked, voice trembling but resolute. "They won't come back no matter what we do." I met her gaze steadily, knowing the fear behind her words. "These trees are not for bringing them back," I said softly. "They are for remembering, for holding the past gently in our hearts while we learn to live again." She scoffed but didn't argue further, the tension lingering like a storm cloud. As the sun climbed higher, the children moved between moments of stillness and bursts of activity. Sora, with his boundless curiosity, dug eagerly, scattering bits of earth but laughing all the while. Micah arrived quietly, carrying a pot of herbal tea, its steam rising like a fragrant mist. She handed cups to the children, the warm liquid comforting them in ways words could not. "This will soothe the tired heart," she said with a smile, her eyes crinkling kindly. Yuki followed shortly after, his broad shoulders steady and reassuring. In his hands were wooden stakes, carefully carved to support the delicate saplings against wind and rain. "The trees need strong roots and steady hands," he said, setting the stakes with precise care. The children watched, some helping, others simply observing the rhythm of rebuilding, of growth and protection. Throughout the day, I spoke to the children of impermanence, how life changed like the seasons, how loss and renewal were intertwined. "Just as these trees will bloom and then shed their blossoms, so too do our hearts open and close," I said. "There is beauty even in letting go." Some listened with quiet understanding, others with skepticism, but all were touched by the fragile hope that stirred beneath the sorrow. Taro finally approached me as the afternoon shadows lengthened. His sketchbook now open to a delicate drawing of an apricot branch, blossoms unfolding in ink and charcoal. "I want to draw them," he whispered, "so I can remember." I nodded, warmth filling my chest, and by remembering, we keep them alive. Kiko lingered nearby, her eyes softer now, though still guarded. I sensed a battle within her, a desire to hold on, and the faintest flicker of possibility in the new life we nurtured together. The village around us remained quiet, still bearing the scars of the landslide, but the small circle of children and I had begun to plant roots not just in the earth, but in each other's fragile hearts. As the day drew to a close, I paused to touch the rough bark of a newly planted sapling. It was slender and unsteady, yet alive much like us all. The wind stirred the apricot blossoms overhead, petals fluttering like whispered promises. Somewhere deep inside, a seed of hope took hold, fragile but persistent. "Tomorrow," I thought, "we will tend to these roots again, and maybe, just maybe, they will grow strong enough to carry us through the days ahead." But as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the village, I could not help but wonder, how many storms would it take before these roots held fast? The earth beneath our feet was soft and new, yet the weight of the past pressed silently, a reminder that healing was not a path without struggle. Still, with each small step, each seed planted, the promise of renewal whispered through the orchard, a song of falling apricots, fragile and beautiful in their impermanence. The soft afternoon sun filtered through the newly budding branches of the apricot trees, casting flickering shadows on the ground where the children sat, their faces a mixture of curiosity, sorrow, and quiet resistance. Grandmother Sato settled herself beneath the largest tree, her silver hair catching the light like a halo, and the children instinctively gathered closer. Hannah stood a little to the side, watching the scene unfold with a gentle smile, her heart swelling with hope and the ache of memory. Long ago, Grandmother Sato began, her voice low and soothing like the murmur of a distant stream. These apricot trees were planted by our ancestors as symbols of renewal. Each blossom that appears after the harshest winters is a reminder that life, no matter how fragile, always finds a way to return. The children listened, some with rapt attention, others with guarded expressions. Taro, sitting quietly at the edge of the group, pulled out his worn notebook and began to sketch. His pencil moved hesitantly at first, tracing the outline of a single apricot blossom, its petals delicate and almost translucent in the afternoon light. As he sketched, the tension in his shoulders eased, his dark eyes reflecting the subtle beauty of the flowers he drew. Kiko, sitting nearer the center, frowned and crossed her arms. "Why do we have to listen to old stories?" she asked softly but firmly, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken pain. "The past didn't save anyone. It only left us with empty homes and memories that hurt." Hannah stepped forward, her voice gentle yet steady. "Kiko, I understand your anger. It's hard to believe in stories when everything feels so broken. But these trees," she motioned toward the blossoming branches above them, "they are more than just plants. They carry the whispers of those who came before us. When we care for them, we honor their lives and keep their spirits alive in a way that words alone cannot." Grandmother Sato nodded, her eyes warm but firm. "The apricot trees remember. They hold the stories of love and loss, of joy and sorrow. When you feel lost, look to the blossoms. They remind us that even after the darkest winters, new life will bloom again." The children fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Taro's pencil strokes grew more confident as he captured the intricate curves of the petals and the subtle veins weaving through each leaf. The act of drawing seemed to open something inside him, a quiet conversation between his grief and the healing promise of the orchard. Kiko's gaze softened slightly, though her posture remained defensive. But what if the blossoms don't come back? What if everything just ends? Hannah knelt beside her, reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. That fear is part of loving something deeply. But even if the blossoms fall, their seeds remain in the earth, waiting for the right moment to grow again. Our memories, too, can be like seeds, small, fragile, but full of the possibility of new beginnings. The breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of the apricots and the earth beneath them. The children breathed it in, some closing their eyes to savor the moment, others watching the petals dance lightly in the wind. The stories and the trees entwined with their own griefs, weaving a fragile tapestry of remembrance and hope. As the afternoon waned, Grandmother Sato shared more tales of villagers who had planted apricot trees after hardships passed, of families who found peace beneath their blossoms, of the unseen connections that bind the living to those who have gone. Hannah's heart ached with the beauty and sorrow of it all, the impermanence of life made vivid in every word. Taro finally closed his notebook, a small smile touching his lips. He looked up at Hannah and then at Kiko, who was staring thoughtfully at a cluster of buds. The orchard was no longer just a place of loss. It was becoming a sanctuary where memory breathed and new stories could begin. As they stood to leave, the sun dipped lower, and the apricot blossoms shimmered in the golden light, a fleeting, precious moment of beauty that promised, despite everything, the possibility of rebirth. Hannah's voice, barely above a whisper, carried the hope she held close. "The trees will carry us forward, if we let them." The children walked back toward the village, their steps quieter, their hearts a little lighter, though the path ahead remained uncertain. Yet beneath the whispers of the blossoms, a fragile new understanding had taken root, one that would grow, slowly and gently, through the seasons to come. And as the last light faded, Hannah lingered beneath the tree, her fingers tracing the rough bark, feeling the pulse of life beneath her touch. The sky hung heavy with the promise of rain, a dull gray veil stretching across the village like a shroud. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fading leaves. a reminder of the landslide that had cleaved through the hillside not so long ago. Beneath this somber canopy, we gathered again in the clearing where the apricot orchard was slowly taking root. The saplings, slender and tentative, swayed gently in the growing wind, their fragile branches whispering secrets to one another. Kiko stood apart from the small circle, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, sharp eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and fear. Her voice broke the quiet like a sudden crack of thunder. "Why do we have to pretend everything is going to be okay?" she demanded, her words sharp and urgent. "Why can't we just remember what was lost? Why do we have to bury it beneath these trees?" Hannah's gaze met hers, steady and soft, but there was a flicker of something raw beneath her calm exterior. "Because, Kiko," she replied gently, "these trees are not a forgetting. They are a way to hold on, to honor those we've lost while still finding a way forward." The tension between them was palpable, drawing the attention of the other children. Taro sat a little distance away, clutching his sketchbook, his dark eyes downcast. He didn't speak, but his presence was a quiet anchor. His fingers traced the contours of the apricot blossoms he had drawn earlier, each petal a silent testament to his own tangled grief. Kiko's defiance did not waver. "I don't want to move on. I want to remember. I want things to be the way they were," she said, her voice cracking with the weight of her denial. The wind picked up, stirring the leaves at our feet and sending a few raindrops pattering against the soil. Hannah stepped closer, her delicate hands reaching out to touch the trembling branches of a young sapling. "Remembering is important," she said softly, "but so is living. These trees, they grow from the past, but they reach toward the future." Grandmother Sato approached quietly, her stooped figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. Her silver hair caught the fading light, and her warm eyes held centuries of wisdom. She placed a comforting hand on Kiko's shoulder and spoke with gentle authority. "The apricot tree blossoms briefly each spring," she said, "and though the flowers fall swiftly, they leave seeds behind. Life is like this, it is fleeting, but always renewed." The children listened, some with skepticism, others with a glimmer of understanding. Even Kiko's sharp gaze softened for a moment, caught between her fear and the elders' calm reassurance. As the first rumbles of distant thunder rolled across the hills, I felt the weight of my own sorrow pressing against my chest. I was no stranger to grief. My own losses were etched deep within me, but I knew that to guide these children through their pain, I had to be stronger than the storm gathering both outside and within. The village itself seemed suspended in a fragile balance. Rebuilding was slow, and the scars of the landslide were fresh in every cracked wall and overturned stone. Fear lingered like the mist that clung to the valley each morning, and uncertainty shadowed every step we took toward recovery. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a stirring, a quiet resilience mirrored in the apricot saplings reaching upward despite the harsh wind. Each child's struggle was a thread in the tapestry of our collective healing, tangled and frayed, but bound by shared loss and tentative hope. I looked again at Kiko, the fire in her eyes tempered now by exhaustion and sorrow. "I know it's hard," I said softly, "but together we can find a way through this. The trees will teach us about patience, about letting go, and about the beauty of impermanence." She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away either. The storm clouds gathered overhead, but so did a fragile sense of possibility. In the cracked earth and whispered promises of the apricot blossoms, we found the first faint notes of a song we would learn to sing together, one of grief, resistance, and the slow, steady bloom of hope. As the rain began to fall in soft, persistent drops, the orchard seemed to shimmer with a quiet life. And in that moment, beneath the gathering storm, I vowed to hold steady for the children, for the village, and for the fragile future we were beginning to nurture. The road ahead was uncertain, but as long as the apricot trees grew, so too would our capacity to heal. And so, beneath the darkening sky, we stood at the edge of change, each of us grappling with the shadows of the past and the promise of new beginnings. The storm clouds were gathering, but within us, a fragile light flickered, waiting to be kindled into something enduring. The journey was far from over, and the winds of doubt and fear would test us again. But for now, there was a moment of breath where hope whispered on the wind, carried in the silent song of falling apricots. The morning sun spilled softly over the village, casting long, pale shadows through the budding branches of the young apricot orchard. The air was crisp, but carried the faint scent of earth and early spring blossoms, a subtle promise of life quietly stirring beneath the surface. Hannah stood among the rows of saplings, her slender fingers brushing gently over a tender leaf as she watched the children gather around her. Their faces, a mixture of curiosity and tentative hope, reflected the fragile beginnings of something new, not just the trees, but the healing that they represented. "Remember," Hannah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper as though afraid to disturb the delicate moment, "these trees need patience. They do not rush to bloom, and neither should we." Taro knelt beside a sapling, his dark eyes focused intently on the small mound of soil he was smoothing around the roots. His slender hands moved with quiet care, the sketches of apricot blossoms he had drawn earlier still pressed in his notebook beside him. For him, the orchard was more than just trees. It was a silent sanctuary where his grief could take form without words. Kiko, standing a little apart with her arms crossed, watched Hannah's gentle instructions with a guarded expression. Her sharp eyes flicked between the saplings and the others, her body tense, as though holding back a storm beneath her calm exterior. When Hannah approached her with a small watering can, Kiko's hand trembled slightly before she took it, her stubbornness warring with the vulnerable fear that clung beneath her defiant stance. "You must be gentle," Hannah reminded her, kneeling down to meet Kiko's gaze. "Too much water can harm the roots, just as too much sorrow can overwhelm the heart. Balance is everything." Kiko's jaw tightened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then, as she bent to water the sapling, a sudden flicker of frustration escaped her, and she whispered, "What if the trees don't grow? What if everything just dies again?" Hannah's eyes softened. "Then we will care for them again. Life is not a line, but a circle. We fall, but we rise like the seasons." She reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Kiko's face with a tenderness that surprised them both. Nearby, Mika approached, her satchel filled with bundles of herbs and dried flowers. She knelt beside Hannah, offering a gentle smile. "These herbs can help protect the saplings from pests and strengthen their roots," she said quietly. "And sometimes, a little healing for the earth helps the healing in our hearts." Hannah nodded gratefully, accepting the bundles. The presence of Mika, with her knowledge of nature's remedies, brought a comforting warmth to the group. It was a reminder that the village's recovery was not hers alone. Others were ready to help nurture this fragile new beginning. Not long after, the sound of footsteps echoed through the orchard, steady and sure. Yuki, the village carpenter, arrived carrying wooden stakes and twine. His broad shoulders and work-worn hands marked him as a man accustomed to building things that lasted. "These supports will help the saplings withstand the winds," Yuki explained as he set to work, his movements calm and precise. "Just as we must support each other now." The children watched as he carefully tied the stakes, reinforcing the young trees with a quiet strength that seemed to seep into their very souls. The act was simple, yet profound, a visible sign that the village was beginning to bind itself together again, that they were no longer alone in their grief. As the day wore on, the children took turns tending the saplings. Taro's quiet focus deepened. He traced the veins of leaves with reverence, finding in the trees a language beyond words. Kiko's resistance softened in small moments when Hannah's gentle encouragement broke through her defenses, allowing her to glimpse the possibility of hope woven into the fragile branches. At one point, Kiko stumbled, her hands trembling as she tried to steady a young tree. A sharp breath escaped her lips, frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's not fair," she muttered, voice cracking. "Why should we have to keep caring for something that might just break again?" Hannah approached slowly, kneeling beside her. "Because it is in caring," she said gently, "that we find strength. Even if the tree falls, the roots remain, and from those roots new life can grow." Kiko's eyes flickered with tears she refused to shed, but the tightness in her chest eased just a little. The orchard was teaching them all difficult lessons about loss, about resilience, about the patience required to heal. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the village, the children gathered their tools and looked out over the rows of saplings. Each tree stood as a quiet testament to their efforts and their shared sorrow. Hannah's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and melancholy. The work was only beginning, but the first fragile shoots of hope were growing. Mika's soft voice broke the silence. "Tomorrow I will bring more herbs, and perhaps some tea." Yuki nodded in agreement. "And I will be here in the morning to check on the supports. We will build this village back, branch by branch." Hannah smiled, a rare and genuine curve of her lips. "Thank you. Together, we will tend these saplings and ourselves." The orchard whispered in the evening breeze, the faint rustle of leaves a song of quiet perseverance. Beneath the fading light, the children in the village began to find their footing once more. Rooted in the soil of grief, but reaching toward the fragile promise of renewal. As night settled over the village, Hannah lingered a moment longer among the trees, her fingers tracing the delicate bark of a sapling. One day, she thought, these branches will bear fruit, and with it, new stories of life that outlast sorrow. But for now, they would tend the saplings, one careful step at a time, learning to nurture hope where loss had taken root. The weight of memory settled heavily around us, like the thick mist that clings to the valley each morning. As I watched Taro sit beneath the young apricot tree, his slender fingers gripping the worn pencil, I felt the ache that was not just his but a silent echo of all our grief. His eyes, dark and unfocused, traced the fragile blossoms on the branches above, as if searching for something that might bloom within himself. His sketchbook lay open, pages fluttering gently in the breeze, filled with delicate lines and shadows that captured not just petals, but the ghost of sorrow that clung to him like a second skin. I approached him quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile cocoon he had woven around himself. "Taro," I said softly, sitting down beside him on the cool earth. "Your drawings, they were beautiful." He did not look up, his voice barely a whisper. "It's easier to draw than to speak." I nodded, understanding the truth behind his words. Grief could be a prison, but sometimes the pencil was a key. "Whenever you were ready," I told him, "I'm here." But Taro's silence was a refuge he was not yet ready to leave. Meanwhile, Kiko's presence was like a storm brewing on the horizon. Her defiance was no longer subtle. It throbbed beneath every word she spoke, every sharp glance she cast my way. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the orchard in hues of rose and gold, she confronted me directly. "Why do you want us to forget?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger and something deeper, fear, perhaps. "Our families are gone. How can you tell us to move on like it's nothing?" I looked at her, the fierce fire in her eyes both heartbreaking and familiar. "Kiko," I said gently, "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to remember in a way that lets you live. The apricot trees, they bloom beautifully, but briefly. Their blossoms fall, and in that impermanence, there is a kind of peace." Her jaw tightened. "Peace sounds like giving up." "Not giving up," I replied, "but accepting. Accepting that life changes, that loss shapes us, but does not have to define us forever." Kiko turned away, the tightness in her stance telling me that her heart was still a battlefield. That evening, sensing the growing tension within the group, I sought out Grandmother Sato. Her small house smelled of dried herbs and old paper, a comforting sanctuary from the restless world outside. She smiled warmly when I entered, her silver hair catching the soft lamplight. "They were struggling," I said, sitting quietly beside her. She nodded knowingly. The weight of memory is a heavy burden for young hearts, but stories can carry it gently. The next day, Grandmother Sato gathered the children inside her home, a modest room warmed by a crackling fire. The children sat close, their faces a mixture of curiosity and guarded emotion. Grandmother's voice rose and fell like soft music as she told them an old tale. Long ago, she began, there was a village much like ours, where apricot trees grew in abundance. The villagers cherished the blossoms, but they knew the flowers lasted only a brief moment before falling to the earth. They learned to find joy in that fleeting beauty